everybody, this is Trevor, and you're watching my channel, Social Dilemma. Thank you for coming here today. Today I want to talk about something that I've thought about for a long time, years, decades. And I want to present this question to you if you've never thought about this and how you would solve this problem. But how long could you go in your household without electricity? Whether you're a single person, your parents with kids, you have elderly parents in your home, whatever your home situation is, you're either on your own or you have family in your house. How long could you survive without electricity? Now, of course, we've all gone through moments where, we used to live in the mountains of British Columbia, and we've had our power go out for 30 hours several times during the winter, and you just cope with it. You just deal with it. 30 hours, not too bad, okay? You can cope with it. But what I'm talking about is long-term power outages beyond even a week and beyond a local or regionalized area, whether it be like Quebec if you're in Canada, or say New York State, you're in the States, or some county or shire in the UK. I'm talking about the entire UK, Canada, United States. Let's say most of the world has no power. And you ask, well, Trevor, how could that happen? How could the whole world? Well, let's look at some things that have happened. There was a solar flare that hit the Earth in 1859, and they called it the Carrington effect. And 1859, what was the only thing that was really hurt back then was the telegraph line, because that's all that was in use for electrical needs, telegraphs, and they were fried, and they were down for I don't know, a few days perhaps, but they got hit hard. But really, life was not impacted by that solar flare, because they were still plowing fields with oxen and horses, and it was like Little House on the Prairie. Okay, 1859. There's no computers, there's no satellites, there's nothing that what we use in 2022 that was used in 1859. So they were able to survive that. But what if something like that were to hit today? A solar flare of that size that hit in 1859 or larger. There's other things too, natural and man-made disasters. Think of whatever you would like. We're in an age, I'm 50 years old, and I was born into, the threat of nuclear war. It's always been looming, ever since I've been born. Even up until today, obviously, okay? So I'm talking, like you hear of these nuclear missiles that can cause an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, that could shut down, power grids around North America. And so what I would like to focus on is more of, let's say the power grids for most of the Earth were gone for 6 months. A longer period of time, perhaps a period of time that, 6 months, perhaps whoever controls the power grids can fix them. But could you go 6 months in your household without electricity? Depending on what time of the year it hit, too. In Canada, we rely on electricity, I know at least in our household, for heat. So that would be a major problem. Cooking. Surprise, here in Canada, too, and if it hit in the summertime, people are like, well, you can do fine. Well, let me tell you, look on a map, look at northern Ontario, and I'll tell you right now, it can get into the 30s with humidity. So 30 Celsius or 90 Fahrenheit with humidity in the summer. How long can people survive, elderly and young people, without even air conditioning? So, heating, cooling, cooking your food, charging up the devices that I'm filming on here. Like everything, we are so connected to electricity, okay? Like this nice electrical lamp here I have. We're so connected to electricity. So how long could you go? I ask myself this question every day. What would happen? Like, how would we survive? You know, I think of things like food and water. Where I live, if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere where you have gravity fed water coming to your house, okay, well water. Now, even some well water, we've had two houses where it was gravity fed spring water, so even with the power out, water came in. But how many people have that? We also had a home that had well water, but we had to have a pump, so you needed electricity to get the water in. So when the power went out, we didn't have water. So those needs, food. Without electricity, how does food get produced? How does it get transferred around? Medical supplies. Things like dental hygiene. So, do you have enough supplies in your home, in your preparedness of what could happen without power? And I think to me, it's one of the most major preparedness events that I can think of. No electricity. And not having electricity for, like, I always think in terms of like 6 months, long term, more than a week. And I don't even know how many people could go even a week without electricity. How many people have more than 3 days worth of food and water supplies in their home? I don't know. I don't know. How many people? So these are things to think of. Could you go 6 months? Do you have sources of alternate forms of energy? That would be solar generators, like your Jackeries, or your diesel generators. Honda. There's many companies that make those. Do you have propane? Like, what do you have? What do you have that you could use to heat your home, to cook your food? How do you bring water into your house? Do you have enough water supply for 6 months? And these questions I think of like almost every day. Could we do this? Medical supplies. From what I've been told in the past, maybe 6 months or so, is I just found out that you're not allowed to have you can't get more than 3 to maybe 6 months worth of medical supplies. Let's say you're a diabetic, like you're stocking up. You want to stock up on whatever medical supplies you use. From what I gather, you're not allowed to get more than 3 months. Well, what happens to your medical supplies with no electricity? Like, how does this stuff get transported around? And I mean, logistically, I guess vehicles, like without refineries, like how does everything, we're so connected to electricity. Like, how's the Walmart going to get filled? How are the drug stores going to get filled? Like, yeah, sure, okay, diesel fuel runs the big trucks, and thank God for you truck drivers out there that deliver everything, okay? But how does it get, like, without electricity, we're so interconnected to electricity. So, medical supplies. I have things written down. Any kind of supply that you have in your home. I mean, it has to be made in a factory. And, if the factories don't have electricity all of a sudden, how do things get made? How do we deal with this? And let's say, hey, in 6 months' time, it could be longer, but I just go on a 6-month term. You have to be prepared enough in your home, whether you're a single person or you have a family, to go long term without electricity. So, I do everything I can. But again, like every day, I'm constantly thinking, I wish I had more water. I wish, more supplies to cook food and whatnot. But like most people, I'm not a billionaire, millionaire. Like, I don't, so I have to obviously allocate the extra funds that I get, which really aren't very much anymore. I'm sure most people on this planet are going through that same thing, but trying to allocate your extra money into preparing for no electricity. And again, I like the 6-month period. Prepare yourself as if tomorrow the grid is down. There's no more electricity. So whatever part of the world you're living in, what's heating and cooling, very important. Can you heat or cool your home without electricity? Can you cook food? It's so important, and yet what I don't know. There's so many other implications that I think about, like social unrest. Like there's a huge social dilemma, right? Like what happens after a week, after 2 weeks? How long before people literally start rioting in the streets, begging for their medical supplies and water? And again, especially the water, because now the home we live in is connected to the city. If the power goes out, eventually the water coming out our taps is going to be turned off. There's no electricity to pump the water in, which is a very something that when our power has gone out, we've lived in this house now that runs on the grid for our water supply for just over a year now. So we've had the power go out, I think, twice, and it's lasted about an hour each time. Every time it does, I tell you what, I grab every bottle, every water bottle. I fill up even, Tupperware bowls. I fill it up. The whole counter's full of bottles of water because I don't know. I don't know. I need that extra water, before the water goes out. I think sometimes you might have half an hour before there's absolutely no water coming out. So you got to do things like that. Water. You cannot live past 3 days. 3 days without water, you'll die. Okay? It's like, what do they call that? The 3 rule. 3 minutes without oxygen, you're dead. 3 days without water, you're dead. 3 weeks without food, you're dead. So think about all these things that we actually rely on for our daily lives. Electricity. And how long could you go without? And there's so many other questions on there. And, a lot of preparedness channels, I know a lot of people, myself included, like we have a lot of supplies built up. But I also wonder, after what period of time do people come to my door and knock on my door and say, "Hello, Mr. Murray, we're here to collect whatever you have to redistribute to the people." And I don't think it would be to the people. I think it would be to more of the political class and their public sector workers that come armed with the top of the line firearms. I think would come to your house to redistribute whatever you got. So sometimes I almost think too that even being prepared is, what happens, in that kind of situation. So many situations to think about, and I don't want to. I don't try to let it drive me crazy, or I don't want it to drive you crazy if you're just thinking about this, watching my video for the first time today. But what do you do without electricity, and how long could you go? I think it's a very important question. And do you have the necessary tools and supplies in your home to cope with? And I like to go with the 6-month marker. 6 months. Could you go without that? Without electricity in your home? Could your community do that? Again, it gets back to my point I just made about how long before public sector workers that come armed with firearms come to your door, forcing you to redistribute your goods. What are you going to do? I mean, I think out of everyone, you want to help yourself, but maybe try to help the people in your local community and whatnot. It's fine, but when you're forced to help everyone forced to share your food and supplies, then things get quite difficult. It turns into like a situation like you'd see on like some zombie television shows where people are forced to work, forced to redistribute their goods, or else. So, I mean, that's really worst case scenario. I think that a lot of people would work together, but how long can you go before? I mean, elderly people, babies and whatnot are affected by just the simple fact, the heat and the cold. I mean, everybody, and people say, oh, Canada, you need air conditioning. Yeah, a lot of places, like 90% of Canada, because most people live along that U.S. Canadian border, right? And it gets damn hot. Even places like Northern Ontario, man, you need air conditioning. At the very least, you need a ton of fans in your house. But how do you run all that? Even just the simple fans, if you don't have air conditioning, how do you run that? Excuse me. How do you run that without electricity? So, what would you do? What would you do to create electricity? Are you buying diesel generators, like the Jackery solar generators? Do you have, like, how many people stock candles in their house? I mean, there's ways of cooking food with, candles and whatnot, but I mean, how does that, that gets pretty dicey too, especially when, let's just look at a major, whether natural or man-made event that knocks the power grid out for 6 months. You know, the magnetosphere, like the magnetic poles, they have reversed on the Earth. Well, how do you get through that? Would that be a major event? They say that when the magnetic field around the Earth is weakened, that solar flares, even smaller ones, like they're going to be even worse when they hit the Earth if something like that. And NASA's been saying for 20 years that the magnetic field has been weakened. So just because the North Pole's it's heading towards Siberia. So what's going on there? That's always a concern too. So solar flares, that sun decides to fart out something, and hits the Earth. That's a major concern, right? Just what could knock out the power grid? What could knock out the power grid for 6 months? And I think there are quite a few things that could happen. Like, say, in my lifetime, I've had to live with the fact that, someone could launch a nuke and, detonate it over North America. And there you go, an EMP blast, electromagnetic pulse, puts out the power grid. For how long? So many things that could happen to knock out the power grid for a long time. But how? Again, I use the 6 month as a benchmark. But how long could you go? I would hope, for humanity's sake, for having a civil society, that we get the power grid up, no more than a week or two. I think after that point, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be running out of supplies. And, what do you do? What do you do? Do you have all your supplies in order? So just something to look into. And just look at your home and think, okay, what can I do to prepare for a power grid failure that's going to go more than a week? Always think in terms like long term, like, several months, 6 months. What if a solar flare knocked out the power grid for more than 6 months? But, I like to use that 6 month benchmark. So could you survive for 6 months without any electricity? And that is the question that I ask myself and I ask you. Okay, so have a good day and stay free. Bye-bye.